Matatu Aotearoa Teaching Council is pleased to facilitate the symposium for ITE providers. In preparation, please turn on your cameras, ensure your microphone is muted to maintain audio quality, and introduce yourself using the chat box and let us know your name, where you come from, and what your role is. Tēnā koutou. Tūmatatia tūramatia, te tuā papa o matatu Aotearoa. Ki runga, ki raro, ki uta, ki tai. Koia ko te manaakitanga, te whanaungatanga, te pono, me te hakamana i te ako. Haumi e, hui e, tāi ki e. Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora koutou. It's lovely to see you. Ko Kelly Turner Tapuangoa, and thank you, Anihira, for opening our hui today. I'm the team lead for the Teacher Capability and Collaboration team at the Teaching Council, and I just want to acknowledge at this point the wonderful ITE team we have, and I know many of you have met them along the way and over the years. But just a special shout out, I guess, to our administration team of Maya and Liana, who are supporting us today, and we couldn't do these without you. This is our 14th symposium, which is really exciting, and that's not even counting the Ministry of Education one. So yeah, it's really nice that we can offer another one today for you. And today's topic is around looking at our professional practice placements and the partnership between yourselves as providers and your teacher school centre partners, and how we can get that cohesiveness and a quality of a unified evaluation between the evaluative lecturers and associate teachers within those placements. So we're really hoping that today you've come along with your own practice to share, and we're going to allow you some time a bit later on to have some breakout time together so you can talk about those. So this is the agenda for today. We've got our first speaker is Karen Aston, and our second is Amanda Perry. Then we'll have our breakout after both of the speakers have been with a little bit of a time to share back after those, and then we'll wrap it up and close for this morning. So I'm going to introduce Karen, who will be our first speaker. So many of you probably already are aware who Karen is, but Karen is a senior lecturer and a doctoral supervisor in the Institute of Education and the program coordinator of the Graduate Diploma of Teaching, ECE. Karen's background is in early childhood education, and as a teacher, manager, early intervention teacher, and then of course now a lecturer at Massey University. Her teaching areas include leadership in early childhood education, studies of infants and toddlers, professional practice, and early intervention. And Karen has done some doctoral research into placement assessments, which is widely recognised and widely cited as well. So Karen, we're really happy that you can agree to come along and share with us today, and I'll hand it over to you now.
Kia ora, thank you so much. Ko Karen Aston toka wingoa, ko Puki Tāpapa te maunga, ko Waitamata te moana, ko Kūpinga o te matauranga te marae, ko Armstrong te whānau, no tamaki makaurau a hau, engari ki te papaioia e noho ana, ko te kura o te matauranga e mihi ana ki te kuninga ki Purihurua. Thank you so much for welcoming me today and giving me this opportunity to come and to talk about the assessment of practicum, something that I have been interested in for many years. I have been in ITE now for 20 years across both university systems and PTE, so a wide range of experiences, and across those 20 years I've had often had primary responsibility for practicum experiences and the development of practicum programs. So quite deeply interested in this space and some of the challenges that we face. So thanks for the opportunity today. I look forward to just, I've taken a lens going back to some of my doctoral work because I thought you might find it interesting to hear, I think, voices that will resonate with you because they're your voices. They were, we did case studies of ITE. So these are lecturer voices, student voices, and AT voices. So I think will sound familiar, but was hoping to bring some quotes and things that might help our conversation today. Thank you. Move slides. So Bill asked if we could take a focus on this idea of having unified and effective assessment. And from my doctoral research, one of the findings was that often we're not achieving those aims of being unified and effective, and for a number of very understood reasons, I think. One of the things we need to understand as we come to this question is the fact that each practicum is very, very unique. Although we try and look at it in maybe somewhat simplistic ways, they're very unique because of the way in which we come together in those triadic relationships that we form in our ITE systems. And what we know, and each of you will smile at, I know, as I say, is that it's so often it's the individual and interpersonal characteristics that are at play that are the defining features in shaping the assessment and how it is actually enacted. It's about who is involved and all that they bring to that experience. And therefore, when we look at how we assess practicum, how we make those decisions about the readiness to enter the profession is exceptionally complex because it's really institutionalized in terms of the way that it's structured and the implications for professionalism, but it's also highly individualized in terms of who is sitting in the room together, the people that are coming to it, and the interpersonal nature of the assessment relationship. And the other really significant factor that I think we need to explore when we come to talk about the assessment of practicum is that despite our best efforts, and I say that really intentionally because the ITE providers I talked with were making really active steps, very active and intentional steps to negate or to try and mitigate this, hierarchical patterns of relationships were still highly evident in the practicum assessment, whether we wanted them to be there or not. There was a really clear hierarchy of where people felt the power lay in the assessment decision making and how assessment was enacted, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Thank you. And I wanted to present this to you. This was one of the key findings, which is amazing when you spend 6 years and kind of come down to one slide of 6 years of your life talking about a topic. But one of the things that I found when I stripped it all away in all the people that I was talking to, the associate teachers and the ITE professionals, when you strip away sort of the institutional lens, there's a question that sits at the heart of everybody who comes kind of to the practicum assessment that I found, which is this question: would I want this student to teach my child or my grandchildren, often because of age, and that was often about grandchildren, it was about looking to future generations. And then for others, it was about, would I want to teach with this student? So this idea of, would I teach alongside them? Would I sit with them? Could I work in a team with them? How would I feel? And it's that professional lens. So I've got a couple of voices that just reinforce this in the next slides. Here's a quote. So I guess I have an internal measurement, a judgment, whatever it is you want to call it. Yeah, about would I leave my children with this teacher? Would I leave my grandchildren with this teacher? And I think that these are really, really important because they're things that come from the belly. There are basic instincts about whether we trust this person, and sometimes we might have lots of questions about a person and we have to make a final judgment. That's part of our role as an assessor. Next slide. As a lecturer, I can bring all the academic stuff, look for and assess the academic stuff, but my ultimate evaluation is usually guided by my intuition. The intuition that they know how to use all that, all the academia stuff, intuition that they're an authentic practitioner, that they have passion and commitment and the rights for children at the forefront, an intuition that they're a good person and that they deserve to be with our children. That's probably an interesting statement, deserving to be with our children, because it carries my own intuition that we don't automatically have rights as adults to work with children, but we must prove it. So to some extent, that might subconsciously be there in my evaluation. Have you earned the right and the privilege? I think these quotes really capture something quite powerful. And I never come to this by saying that that should be negated. when I'm out visiting, which I still do on a regular basis, those things function for me too. And they're a really important part of my decision making. I've come to trust those professional judgments over the years. I think they're often really informed by our experiences. They're really powerful. So my research doesn't talk about negating those or suggesting that they are wrong, simply that when we talk about the assessment of practicum, we should be more transparent about talking about those things, that we can mask them by putting criteria on top of them, but those criteria serve an ancillary role. They sit alongside those internal judgments, and that those judgments sometimes we need to bring to the fore a little bit more. We need to look at them and unpack them a little bit more, because at times they're problematic. We know that there can be, as I'll talk about it in a minute, there can be bias and other things at play. So what we need to do is bring them to the forefront, to give them visibility, to make them more transparent than we might otherwise be doing so. So very briefly, just as I mentioned, why this becomes so complex, if you think about here on this slide, I looked at what were the influences that each person brought to the practicum assessment. So when you look at this, you've got your student teacher with all their past experiences, their life experiences. More particularly, we found that their culture, gender, and age were highly significant about what they brought to that experience. What stage of study they were at, whether they were at the early stages of their study versus someone who was about to graduate. We'll talk about that complexity a little bit too, as well as the expectations they had as students of what an assessment would look like. Likewise, when we're sitting with an associate teacher, whatever terminology we might use, and all their prior experiences, all their internal working models of what they think a student teacher and a teacher should be, what they value in their student teacher, all of those things, and how they interpret our criteria, the ITE criteria. And we know, I'm sure everyone will smile and nod if I say not every ITE interprets that criteria in the ways that we might understand. They interpret those in very different ways. They interpret their roles in very different ways. So we see a real continuum of how ATs understand their role, as well as their professional practice knowledge. From an AT, I was just with an AT last week. It was a very, very first student teacher. She was so nervous and she was really intimidated by the student who was older than her and had more experience, through to we've got ATs who've been teaching for many, many years and who bring a very different experience to it. Likewise, then there's all the experience we bring as in our teacher educator role, all that knowledge, our professional experience, our beliefs about teaching and pedagogy and how that impacts as well. Thank you. Then around this, we don't just have those individual factors, then we have these relational factors. Each one of us then comes into this dyadic and triadic relationships. And within them, I'm sure, again, you're going to smile when I tell you that's probably where a lot of the challenges arise. It's in the relationship when these individuals come together in relationship and navigating it. So what the research showed was the AT and student dyad was the most influential, it was the most formative, whereas the student teacher and teacher educator dyad was seen as having the power. That's where actually the power in the assessment lay. And then what was interesting, and I wonder if this will resonate with you, is that in the AT teacher educator dyad, there was this dynamic about teacher educators wanting to maintain relationships with the providers. And so wanting to not disrupt, perhaps in schools, in early childhood centres, disrupt relationship, because we saw them not only in the moment for that student, but the future students that were coming through, or the need for future placements. And that impacted on an assessment when it happened. Thank you. And then, of course, wrapped around all of that is all the institutional influences that we have, as well as all the influences that are happening in that practicum community where that student is. And I can't go into all those now, but they are there's a multiplicity of factors that are there, right down from funding to staffing to our visit practices, how long we get to visit, how often we visit, the structure, all of those factors are at play. So when I say it's complex, I think you can really see just how complex one assessment is and why one assessment will not look like another one, even when we're using the same criteria or the same format or the same style. Kia ora. So what are the issues that student teachers said they faced in the assessment that caused them to find conflict? Very openly and challenging to all of us is the fact that students report a high level of bias, particular cultural bias. When there wasn't a cultural match, they were there was quite a number of really stark quotes about the bias that they felt that they faced, particularly if English wasn't their first language, or if they were culturally diverse and were not in settings that perhaps found were welcoming of that. And that was really challenging to read. And to what I think we need to alert to is how often students are masking. There's an element of masking in their behaviour to try and please and to present a certain way that they think that navigating the assessment experience. Breakdown of experiences of relationships are obviously critical. When students were in services where their AT where they didn't feel they were liked or supported or welcomed, it was really distressing. And what was interesting in the study was just how long-term those feelings were for students. I had students in their final year still openly kind of brought to tears by talking about early practicum experiences that they had of assessment and what it had meant for them. Lack of support, stress and anxiety will be of no surprise to anybody. And we also know students really reported quite often that they felt trapped by unexpected or unfair assessment outcomes. When they thought they were doing okay, generally it's they thought they were doing okay, people hadn't told them that maybe they weren't, and suddenly they're confronted with a report or a triadic where things are revealed to them that they weren't anticipating, and just how significant the impact of that was, and it happening quite often. Students likewise, even in institutions where the institution was telling me about how much they were working to enhance self-assessment, which I know we all are in our modelling, despite robust self-assessment measures, students still felt they had no power, that it was a documentary, but that it didn't really have power in the assessment decision-making. And perhaps most problematically is that masking idea where there was just such an emphasis on needing to please. The student didn't know what to do when, do they please the lecturer or do they please where they are, the classroom that they're in or the AT that they're in? Who do they choose? Who do they prioritise? Which practices do they do if they don't align, if the institutional practices don't align with where they are on a placement? Who do they please? What path do they take? How do they navigate that? Thank you. So here's a couple of quick quotes. In my second practicum, my AT gave conflicting feedback to my teacher educator. She told me how great everything was that I was going. Then as soon as my teacher educator came, she turned around and told her the complete opposite. And no one here is surprised, are they, I think, by that. And this was the tension here. The standards I had to pass did not fit with the centre's policies or their philosophy. I therefore received negative feedback as I was trying to fit the centre's way of life. And then that affected their assessment. I thought this one was really, really interesting. At the end of one of my assessments, my teacher educator asked me which teaching standard I would like to fail. I was really shocked and asked her to clarify, and she responded by saying that their institution didn't like it when second year students passed all the standards at that early point, so she always picks one for them to work on. Knowing that I'd shown competency in all of the standards and having evidence of this really upset me. So again, that powerlessness that they felt. So what about ATs? What were they feeling? Time, the time to actually invest in students, and that's become only more challenging in recent years. Again, those challenges over the conflict in relationships and sitting down in a room together and navigating those relational elements. But as you know, one of the common themes that came through was that many of our ATs struggled over clarity of expectations, of actually understanding what criteria meant and what it looked like for any given student. In particular, across the time of a study, the time of a student study. So what it should look like in a first year compared to a third year, or at a given point of time. ATs really felt a lot of pressure around failing students. There was that sense that it reflected badly on them. So we had that terrible feeling when an AT felt it was their fault, perhaps, if a student was, and so but likewise also then we have other cases where it was about all the blame being put on the student, or even more so on the institution. There was a lot of casting back to the institution being the problem of why a student might be failing, and that also had long-term outcomes. Sorry, I also should just, sorry, I'm still just going on that previous slide if I can. I should have just clarified too with that clarity of expectations. That was also about the ATs who were working across more than one provider. And many of our ATs did have multiple providers feeding into their services, into their schools and their early childhood services. And so that was also problematic because they understood that different providers had different expectations. And often there was a comparison happening over what one wanted and what another one didn't. And there were some quite critical comments made around how ITEs judged institutions based on that. But ITEs also felt that they were not really heard and that they were often silenced, or there was tactical compliance so that they weren't going to fight back against what was seen as institutional power. Now the next slide. Thanks. So during a triadic discussion, my opinion was not asked for once. When I did try to join in, I was talked over by the visiting lecturer. This was a senior lecturer, highly qualified, and I was intimidated by her. And I chose it not because it was unique, but because it was actually quite universal. There was quite a bit of ITEs, about 70% reported feeling silenced in a triadic, that they couldn't speak freely in a given moment for a variety of reasons, many of which were relational. Thank you. This one I thought was interesting. I wanted to bring this one because it's about the long-term implications. She said, I had a final year student who lied about the hours on her timesheet. She was leaving early and misguiding what she was actually doing. But when I commented and queried this to the provider, there was no follow-up or phone call from that provider. I presume the student graduated, so that lack of knowledge. And this lack of integrity on the part of both the student and the provider was really disturbing. As a result, I would never appoint a teacher with a qualification from that institute. And again, this wasn't isolated. I had so many reports of people saying that they wouldn't use a particular provider anymore or wouldn't employ someone from that provider based on one incident. Often just one incident was all it took to breach trust or to breach that relationship between the provider and the education setting if they felt there wasn't transparency or if an issue wasn't resolved. So I thought that was of interest. Thank you. So if you look at this, I thought this was quite interesting. If you look at what was most concerning to associate teachers, it was feeling unsure about whether a student was meeting the expectations for their level of study. 72% of our ATs weren't sure if a second year was meeting, like knowing how those criteria were to be applied across the 3 years or across a program. And again, 72% were difficult relationships with students impacting on that assessment relationship. Whereas, if we look here, that disagreement was the idea of disagreement on an outcome was far less significant than those other features in terms of just how often or how significant those challenges were. Thank you. So ATs really want good relationships. So, and that can work to our favor, but likewise it can work in terms of that tactical compliance can also be problematic. And we know that they want the opportunity to talk about criteria and to clarify their uncertainties. They're looking for consistency and expectations. And we know that with the move to the standards, one of the aims of that, and will be really good to revisit, is whether those standards give us more consistency across the providers and if ATs are finding that easier. But they're looking for greater transparency. Those reports of people saying, I never heard back, or I didn't get follow-up, or I didn't know what happened. That transparency of reporting back and sharing back, which we know has privacy issues. So I understand the other side of that, right? Often I think it's a privacy issue and AT, we're not necessarily able to give information back, but still meaning going back and talking and debriefing, I think, is important, even if we can't give specific detail. They want to be respected for their contribution and further PD and training. And as you all know, this is how to do that in time poor, in ways that actually attract people to come, because we know the providers are putting stuff out there, but it's really hard to sometimes do it in ways that are attracting the people that we want to see coming to those sessions. Thank you. I'm nearly there, I promise. I'm doing okay. And what about ITE providers? What did they tell me? What was important for them? Top of the list was that preservation of relationship with education settings. As much as you're going in to work with a student, you're actually going in to work with that setting and to build relationship with that setting. So it's this interesting tension between what's happening in the moment, but what also might be needed for the future. Keeping relationships in your communities, keeping relationships with those people, with our sector partners that are so important to us. But that has implications even on an individual assessment and how we navigate it. Again, IT providers know that there's issues with those clarity of expectations. It's not unknown. They're aware that what they're expecting might not be what an AT is expecting, or what even a student is interpreting from the same criteria. But this was the big message, you know, that core question I raised at the beginning. It came out of a space about professional gatekeeping, and I don't use that term with a negative connotation. That real understanding that they stand at the gate between the study and the children, the tamariki of our future, the schools, the early childhood services, and they held that professional responsibility very heavily, like with a deep sense of integrity about making sure that those who are deemed ready to graduate really are ready to be and equipped to be in our education services moving forward. So there is a deep sense, and so that's often where tension lies, is they care very deeply about the students and who they're going to be when they're working with our tamariki. And so there's that tension between, is a student ready to pass? Are they ready to move into the sector or not? As well as dealing with, and I know this is the case for all of us, these deep issues around ethics, student well-being. You know, at the moment, we are dealing so much with the well-being and the mental health of our student teachers and the physical well-being. That is such a significant issue in our practicums right now, as well as those greater professional issues of, you know, are our students culturally ready? Are they socially ready? Are they physically ready? Are they all of that holistic view of readiness that we bring to determining their readiness to enter the profession? And then within that, all the institutional constraints that come to play, the time they have, the ability to do multiple visits or to revisit a practicum, or to all of those things that wrap around that can be so challenging in the assessment of practicum. Thank you. So this might resonate. This is a teacher educator who said the common situation is where the AT doesn't provide honest or accurate feedback and only highlights the positive aspects of practice, rating students more highly than is deserved, giving the student a false perception of how well they're doing. And then they're unprepared when I go in to give them honest feedback, and this results in conflict because it doesn't align. They haven't heard this, and when I'm sharing it, it doesn't align, and it's harder to accept the feedback. And then, I don't know if some of you have experienced this, it seemed again quite endemic, AT giving satisfactory kōrero at the time of the visit, but when the final report comes in, it doesn't line up. The report just is suddenly raising all these issues that weren't able to be addressed when there was time and capacity to do so during the practicum. Thank you. So I've added this sort of final quote as I draw to a close, because I also asked all the providers I worked with, all the students, what could assessment be? And this was a quote I received, which I thought captured a lot of the thinking really beautifully. When the assessment is realistic and honest, and the student takes away with them the encouragement and drive to keep learning and developing in their practice. Mutual respect is a key thing here. A sound professional relationship and rapport must be developed very early on, giving the right to speak honestly without offence being taken. As a result, the student can be encouraged to step out into trying new things, taking risks, meeting challenges, knowing that they'll be supported and encouraged to develop far beyond their own expectations. And I thought that was pretty inspirational, actually. I thought that captured so much of, I think, what the participants in the assessment of practicum wanted for the assessment to be when it was stripped of so many of the challenges that I've kind of tapped on today. Thank you. So my final thoughts were this, that I want to encourage us to keep talking about how subjective the assessment of practicum is, and all those individual and interpersonal and institutional factors that are at play, rather than just looking at criteria in a perhaps too simplistic way, and to dialogue around these difficult issues, like, if we are using our intuition, is our intuition without bias, for example? What is it informed by? What values are driving those intuitive professional judgments? To talk about how can we be increasingly transparent in our assessment practices and decision making? How can we continue to find ways of working that challenge those established hierarchical patterns and really find that students feel that they're more empowered, ATs feel more empowered, and actually even that teacher educators feel more empowered in that assessment process? I want to suggest that I think debriefing, I mentioned as I went through that it was quite shocking to me to hear people talking about incidences that had happened years in the past and how significant they still were for them, that they'd never really debriefed those moments, whether it was a student experiencing negative feedback, whether it was an AT who felt unheard, or a teacher educator in the midst of a highly charged situation. And I'll say here, which I didn't mention earlier, teachers being really worried about the litigious nature now of assessment, that they could be, they can be challenged. Everything they write or say can be challenged, and even to the point of litigation later. And that has a significant bearing on how that they are then moderating what they're saying and doing. So I think debriefing is essential somehow to unpack these things, to talk about them, to give room for that emotional and cognitive processing. As well as always, we're looking for how we work through that associate teacher selection, training and PD, so that their part in bringing the assessment together can be empowered and strengthened in addressing some of the things that I've talked about today. So I hope that resonated. I hope that was somewhat helpful. I really look forward to the conversation that this might elicit, and my thanks to Amanda, who I've had the privilege of getting to know this week and to talk about, and she's going to pick up some of these thoughts and take them further. But thank you. I hope that was of some value. And kia ora, thank you for your time. Ngā mihi.
Kia ora, thank you, Karen. Morena tātou, ko Bill Hapataka Wingoa. I work as a lead advisor at the council in Te Oho Paerewa. This is a fascinating topic. Before we turn to our second speaker, I would like to try and share some of my key takeaways from Karen's presentation. Firstly, Karen, I think you really pointed out just the sheer complexity of the challenge, and we shouldn't underestimate that. I really liked also how you extracted the individual factors from the relational and the institutional, and how they merged and conflicted and intertwined. I also really like the way that you approach the principle of trust, and how if trust is breached, people get hurt, and any one of us can fail in our roles, be we evaluative lecturer or AT or student. So great start, and we'll move on. So we're very fortunate. We've got a second speaker who's going to undoubtedly take her own unique perspective on this topic to either support or challenge or intertwine with Karen's. It is Amanda Perry. She's the Head of Education at Laidlaw College. Amanda has taken up the role of Head of Education at Laidlaw since August 2021. Her role is to ensure the flourishing of the initial teacher education and Christian education programs at Laidlaw College. Her qualifications are in psychology, primary school teaching, early childhood education, counselling, play therapy, and adult education. Professionally, Amanda has worked in early childhood. She is currently completing her PhD studies, examining how qualified moderators of online community health forums support individuals in suicidal crisis. And in the course of her ITE leadership, Amanda has also considered the issues we're discussing today, and we're very much looking forward to hearing from her today. So Amanda, thank you. Kia ora, and over to you.
Kia ora, Bill, thank you. Ko Amanda Perry toko ingoa, no Waimauku, tamaki makaurau aho. So hi everyone. Thank you, Karen. It's been a pleasure working with you this week, and really resonate with the points that you've raised. So thank you for that. So as Bill has mentioned, everyone, I'm representing Laidlaw College today, and I'm the Head of Education here, overseeing the Bachelor of Education Primary and the Grad Dip Secondary. So unlike Karen, I don't have research to lean on here. I'm speaking from my experience of leading these programs. So I welcome conversation around similarities or differences in terms of what you have or what you're seeing in your experiences. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd give a bit of rundown about how we operate at Laidlaw, and that's not to say that we've got it perfect by all means. We're continually changing things up and experimenting to see how we can best get a good formula for our students and our lecturers here. So at the moment, we have a practicum manager who oversees the practicum portfolio, so the bigger umbrella of practicum. We have student hubs that is overseen by specific lecturers. So this idea that our students will be assigned to a lecturer or a visiting lecturer for a course of a practicum journey, so that they are exposed to different lecturing styles, visiting styles, and that they have a point of contact for pastoral care. Also, they're able to go and have those conversations around what does assessment look like for this practicum? What is the learning criteria, the success outcomes? So while on practicum, we strive to have relationships with our associate teachers who are required to complete written reports and engage in ongoing discussions, ideally ongoing discussions with our student teachers, and feedback to the visiting lecturer if they have any concerns. And so there, our hub leader or our visiting lecturer who's overseeing those umbrella students is a sounding board and a source of support for ATs. Next slide, please. When our visiting lecturers or our hub leaders go on a visit, the most important thing for them to remember is that this is an artificial experience for the student in terms of we're asking a lot. We're asking students to leave their normal routine of everyday life and go and implant themselves in a centre or a primary setting or a secondary setting, and very quickly develop a sense of belonging with the associate teacher and the students. So I like for the teachers to have that in mind, that it's a difficult experience, or it can be a difficult experience. And there are clear power imbalances, whether we are conscious of it and want to name it or not, there are clear power imbalances. And for our students, it is high stakes. So it's important that we have humility around this for our students. So our visiting lecturer will observe the students, and then have a check-in conversation with the associate teacher to make sure that it's all going well from the associate teacher's perspective, but also that the associate teacher has what they need to succeed in their role as the associate teacher. And then there is a triadic conversation with the associate teacher and the student. Next slide, please. During the visit or the observation, the visiting lecturer has evidence gathered from the observation, and ideally from looking at the student's portfolio before they go on that visit. So they're gaining a sense of what the practicum placement has been like for the student, what they've been doing while on placement, looking at reflection, so they can see some of the tensions that the student might be navigating and the learning edges. The student in the triadic is encouraged to have evidence to share from their portfolio, so that they're not necessarily just reflecting on what they think, but they've also got evidence to support what they're saying that they're doing or they think they're doing. And also the AT would have evidence to support what they're saying they have observed during the student's journey. Next slide, please. Where it gets tricky, however, is that when we don't quite see the same things. So as Karen alluded to before, we have these hunches. However, sometimes our ATs may, what we would say, collude with a student in terms of they might be motivated to see the student pass maybe a little more than they should be, in terms of, and it could be that they feel that the assessment of their student is reflecting them or their work as an associate teacher. So they might be a bit keener for that student to pass than the visiting lecturer is, based on what they've seen. Or it could be that the AT is too critical of the student without sufficient prior conversation, which links nicely to what Karen was saying before. Or also the AT or the school has a really strong opinion that the student should not pass, and that's where conflict can arise when the visiting lecturer doesn't hold the same opinion, that this isn't a clear fail. For example. Next slide, please. So in terms of understanding that the assessment process is tricky, that practicum placements are tricky, what do we need to bear in mind or do differently? We need to be really clear about the expectations and the criteria for our students, our student teachers, as well as our associate teachers. We need to highlight for particularly our student teachers, the importance of evidence gathering and self-assessment, so that the students are able in those triadic meetings to confidently talk about their practice and the evidence that they have gained or collected along the way. We need to also normalise, before students go on practicum, the hiccups of working in relationship with others. Working in relationship isn't always easy, and speaking from the pastoral side is, relationships are characterised by rupture and repair, which is very normal. It's how we acknowledge the rupture in the relationship and how we do the repair work. And also normalizing needing more time on placement. Something I've been pondering is when we have a degree takes you 3 years, for example, for a BEd, for a Bachelor of Education Primary, we're setting students up to think that 3 years is all they may need, when in reality, for some of our students, they may need more time to cook, as we like to put it, and there should be no shame around that. I acknowledge that there's complexities with student loans and outside commitments with whānau, etc. But I think there is no shame in needing more time gaining enriching classroom experience. So something I find myself thinking about in evenings is how do we normalise that for our student teachers, and that there's no shame about needing that more time, and how do we make that a realistic possibility in our programs when we are time bound, or we do promote it being a 3-year program, for example. Or for our grad dips, which I think is a huge ask, taking a human being with a prior expert base and transforming them into teachers in less than 12 months. How do we normalise that that may take slightly longer? And so it raises the questions of competency versus time served. Next slide, please. We could also be communicating our learning edges, our students' learning edges early and consistently. I think there can be a tendency for visiting lecturers, particularly the earlier a student is on their journey, thinking this will come right with time. Let's give the student more time and hope it comes right, which leads to my next point, is we cannot always hope that the student will just improve over the time. We need to be really conscious. We need to be really fair and consistent with our feedback. Similarly, we shouldn't be waiting to the 3rd year to be raising our concerns around practice. This should be an ongoing conversation that we're having with our learners. Finally, failing, in my opinion, failing a practicum should not come as a surprise to a student. There should be lots of conversations that are happening in advance of that, so a student shouldn't be blindsided or surprised. Next slide, please. In terms of what we could be doing as a provider is communicating more clearly our ITE responsibilities and tensions to schools. I don't think schools always understand the complexities and the tensions that we must walk. And so helping them in a user-friendly way, understanding some of those complexities, I think would be enriching for our relationships. And following on from that is, it's not always a natural skill for people to become an associate teacher. So for us to be reflecting on what PD opportunities could we be providing our associate teachers to help them develop the skills that will enable them to thrive as associate teachers and to enjoy the experience. And how do we have those open channels of communication back and forth so that associate teachers in schools and centres can feel like they're being heard, and that if we don't necessarily follow their recommendations, sharing the thinking that we can with them and letting them know that they have been heard. And also, how do we consider in advance how to navigate the ruptures and repairs with our partner schools or centres? Inevitably, as mentioned earlier, we are going to have disagreements. It's part about being in a relationship. But how do we acknowledge that, and how do we have a process for when that happens that we're able to support and maintain those relationships? It's not going to be okay for long term for schools or centres or providers to just not work with each other. That's not a sustainable solution for either party. Next slide, please. So in summary, as we're working with humans, it's going to get messy in our work with one another. We need to be purposeful, clear, and consistent in our approaches. We also need to have grace for each party in that journey, and we need to consistently reflect and improve the process. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Really appreciate your message today. Kia ora everybody, I'm Linda. I'm one of the lead advisors at the council, and great privilege of working in the ITE space some days. Yeah, I really appreciate the follow on from Karen's conversation, I suppose, this morning to hear those messages about, especially that, I like your term, artificial situation that we find where we do have to step into a new space, form relationships quickly, whilst trying to manage an assessment task and meet the expectations from an ITE perspective, but also as a student teacher from your own perspective of what you think a teacher needs to be and should be, and all of those other things that sit in that space. So you really appreciate your thoughts this morning, Amanda, and sharing how Laidlaw approach that. And I know that each provider approaches things slightly differently, but those same themes sit throughout there. We're going to move on now to an opportunity to have a breakout conversation with the other people from across the motu who have joined us today. So having a quick conversation about those key factors that you feel help us to make reliable, unified assessment judgments in that associate teacher, visiting lecturer, or teacher educator space when we visit students on practice. So Maya's going to pop a link into the chat, and if you can put your thoughts into that link. So if one person in your team could, in your breakout, could take responsibility for putting those notes in there, and then we'll collate those notes and share them with everybody at the end of the session. So enjoy your chats and catch-ups with everybody, and we will be back in here shortly. And you can volunteer a kind person from your group who would like to be the person nominated to share back with the rest of us. So thanks. If you could put us into our breakouts now. Thank you, Maya, Diana.
Kia ora koutou. I think that is everybody back again. Hopefully you found that a great breakout session. We've been joined by a few extra people during that time too. So if you'd like to introduce yourselves using the chat function, that's great. And also just a reminder that the notes that you have created during these breakout sessions will be collated and sent to you along with the slides and a recording. And all of that is packaged and published on our Teaching Council website, so you can always go back and retrieve it at any time you wish. So I'll kick off now, and be fabulous if one person from each of the breakout rooms would be prepared to share back with the group what your discussions have been. Probably if we allow for just over a minute per group, that'd be great. So I'm not too sure who was in which group, so I'm just going to have to rely on somebody to pop their hand up and offer to be the first person. So the first group, anybody from the first breakout room? Thanks,
Yep,
Sandy.
I can do that. Kia ora koutou. So quickly, we discussed the importance of information for each individual in the triad, and then how the pairs would work, and then how the triads would work. We also discussed the importance of expectations in terms of the relationships, so like the paperwork expectations, but also the personable relationships. We talked about the use of ngā paerewa and the key teaching practices for clarifying expectations and for gathering evidence. We talked about the need for the timeliness and readiness for practicum of all tauira. We talked about the importance of building trust between the provider and the tauira before they go out on practicum. So if it doesn't go well, that student knows that we have their back, that we're there to support them. We reinforced how contextualized and how variable it is, and how we don't know what's going on in the life of the associate teacher. They might be having a terrible time and actually not in a good place to be a student teacher, to have a student teacher. So then we talked about how can we improve the way that tauira kaiako and the kura and the associate teacher are better matched. We talked about the strength in having more than one tauira kaiako in a kura, so that they when that happened, I feel that the school takes a more broader responsibility for the students, rather than just the student being the responsibility of one associate teacher. And I talked about how my experience is more that the associate teachers aren't overly benevolent, but are overly critical and have often, I find, unrealistic high expectations of the kaiako tauira, especially on their first practicum. And that's us in a minute or a wee bit more.
Thanks, Sandy. That was lovely. Okay, group 2.
I'm happy to go because I've got the notes in front of us. So we focused on there were two main themes in our korero. We were talking about relationships and the different aspects of that. We talked about the tension where you're trying to maintain a relationship for that student, and then the relationship that we have in mind for the future. And we sometimes those two things align, but sometimes there is some conflict in that, and how that can affect how we work together to make assessment. We talked about the absolute foundation of relationship in terms of having an ongoing relationship and collaboration with particular ATs over the course of many years helps to create those reliably unified assessment judgments. And we talked about the fact that often our relationships with those ATs are mediated through the coordinator or through the student, and so trying to find really purposeful ways of actually getting face to face with the ATs if we can, or providing multiple opportunities for the ATs to get in touch with us, or us in touch with the ATs, so that that relationship builds and isn't mediated through a second party. And then the other kind of theme was talking about the fact that actually the standards are our reference point for reliably unified assessment judgments, and that they are really helpful, particularly if we're wanting to raise concerns with a student or with an associate teacher, that having those agreed standards to always come back to as our reference point has been really helpful. And I think that sums us up. Thank you.
Thank you. Group 3.
I'm not sure which group we were, so I'll just say
Thanks, Paul.
We're group 3. So Brian and myself from University of Auckland and Salote from the University of Otago were in our group, and we went a little bit rogue with our korero, and we're really interested in talking to Salote, who's had really recent experience being both on the university side and the school side, and what makes for a good university visiting lecturer, professional supervisor. And we talked about someone who's open and puts students at ease, and makes time for that AT conversation, and are consistent in what they say and what they write. So there's a consistency there, and the importance of building a relationship with the school and the kura. So they're not someone who just comes in once. That's ideal. We talked about the complexity of passing on information about students to schools and kura that will put those students in the best place to pass, but not kind of maybe set them up for a kind of predetermined outcome. So we talked about the complexity of that, but the importance of open and honest conversations. And just about the busyness that often we, as professional supervisors, have a whole lot of different commitments, from publishing to marking to teaching and our practicum work. And associate teachers are often got millions of things on, and sometimes the student teacher in the middle of it can feel we're all a bit too busy, and trying to make sure we have space where we are all present for that student teacher. So I don't think we really answered the question, but we had a very nice chat.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, so group 4 was Catherine, Jill and Sean. I think Jill may have had to go and teach a class, but Sean or Catherine, which one would like to feedback?
I've got the notes in front of me. Shall I do it? I
Thanks.
can see Jill and Sean still there. We had 2 main parts of our korero. The first one was about building relationships with just with the triad, but thinking about, again, time, the difficulty of time being spread out over the country for some of us providers, and the increasing difficulty of having contract visitors who don't know the students, and they turn up and have this really intense conversation without any sort of framework or understanding of the student. Sean talked about the New Zealand Tertiary College having regular professional development opportunities for their ATs. There's a knowing the ropes that happens once a month, and then another session every 2 weeks in an evening. So that's a way of creating that community. The idea of sending visiting lecturers to the same centres so they build a relationship with that centre or school. And then we had a bit of a korero about the KTT, KTPs, understanding what they are and what they look like when students over a 3-year course, what they look like at the beginning and then at the end. Is there a difference between level 5 and level 7? The shift of power towards schools and centres, Sean talked about this, the ATs, because they're working with the students and really highlighting where they're at with their KTPs, how they're that they have a lot of influence on what that looks like, and then thinking about how that is different for different schools. And so they will be talking about what those things look like in the context of their school, I think. And then we had a little talk about portfolios and ways that students gather evidence and of their placements. So,
thanks, Catherine. So the next group was group 5, Amanda, Christine, Jay, and Carissa.
I took notes, so I'm happy to jump in and report back. Is that okay with the team? So some of the things that we discussed have already been raised. We started off by talking. We've had recently a bit of a collab between AUT and University of Canterbury, where we've supplied a visiting lecturer from our our pool to visit student teachers from AUT who are placed in the Nelson region. And so that kind of opened up a conversation about consistency around our templates and our observation and reporting formats. And we kind of wondered whether there would be some benefits and whether it's worth a conversation and getting some kind of consistency in the broad format, so that associate teachers aren't trying to kind of navigate between 2 or 3 different sets of paperwork, which increases the challenge for them. We also wondered whether it would be helpful to connect up the professional practice office managers and leads around the Motu, so that they can quite easily, instead of these requests filtering down through deans and associate deans, that they can contact each other and say, you know, can you help out? Because we're increasingly got student teachers who are all over the place and are not neatly contained within what might be considered the boundaries of a particular institution. We also talked about professional development for associate teachers, and again wondered whether there is any potential benefits in collaborating across institutions to design some, you know, podcasts or some little resources that we could all make use of in terms of some of those general important foundational skills that we want associate teachers to have, and visiting lecturers actually also, because it's increasingly becoming an outsourced task, I think, for many institutions as we face downward pressure on our permanent academic staffing. We were worried about the drop in people who are interested in becoming teachers, leading to a decrease in the number of people who are interested in becoming associate teachers, and feel that there's some, you know, pipeline work that might be needed to make being an associate teacher a more attractive proposition through micro-credentialing, better remuneration, but that's kind of outside of our scope of work. But also we talked about changing the narrative about schools and associate teachers and centres doing us a huge favour by hosting our students, and kind of, you know, wanting to turn that around and say, well, actually, everybody, this is a win-win proposition. Okay, no, in the majority of cases, centres and schools are getting a willing, engaged, competent to some level student teacher who's an extra pair of hands, somebody to have professional conversations with. So I kind of wanted to kind of shift the narrative around a bit from it being something that's a huge favour to something that's actually a win-win. And then we also talked about, wouldn't it be great if the system supported student teachers better when they're on professional practice? So, you know, that idea of a paid internship, because it's hugely stressful for student teachers going on to practice. They can't work. It can be that's just another layer of stress that many of them are carrying. And you know, if there was better financial support for them being actually another worker in the space, that might be helpful back, you know, like it used to be back in the 70s and 80s, where people got paid to be to train as teachers. So I think that's everything, unless anybody wants to jump in and add anything more from the team. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Jay. Okay, we'll move on to group 6. Jasmine Kerry Privy.
Oh, kia ora, I'm going to speak on behalf of our room, ko Carla Tēnei. A lot of what we've got on our notes has been discussed, so I'll just go to the points that haven't been, that maybe not haven't been expanded on as much. One thing we talked quite a lot about was just communication, and not just the clarity of it, but the accessibility to it, and how are we getting, when we've got students distance, you know, from Invercargill to sort of Kaitaia, how are we ensuring that the information for those settings is accessible and that if I suppose it's kind of been talked about that it's all getting processed or interpreted or utilised or integrated with in a similar way, because there can be really different interpretations of what we're putting out there, or just willingness and ability to engage. And when I say ability, we're talking about time. Someone just talked about someone in their group I've just come from the secondary school space less than a year ago as a student teacher coordinator, a PCT coordinator and an AT, and definitely that's a big part of it, is actually how do you find the time to access all this. Like, you want to do a good job for the providers, but it's a massive time and commitment issue. So yeah, that was a big one. And then we also talked quite a bit around the expectations around attendance on practicum having a massive impact. And I think that ties into what you were just talking about, Jay. I think with some of it is a financial implication. If students don't meet that minimum requirement, and we're assessing them, like, how are people assessing holistically, what's our view of that, what's the kura or the settings, as well as the teaching council requirements of the amount of time that kaiako pitamata need to be in those schools. So that can have a big impact on assessment and the final decisions that are made there. I think mostly everything else we've talked about has been covered in some way by other rooms.
Thank you so much. And my apologies, Jackie, you had your hand up for a while and I can't see everybody on my screen at the moment. So Jackie, did you have something you needed or would like to say? I'm not sure, maybe she has gone.
No, that would have been a mistake.
Oh, okay. Not a problem.
Yeah. I wasn't aware it was there.
No problem. Okay, so room 7 was Eamon, Karen and Sandy.
That would be me. I've been the nominated speaker because I seemed to talk too much in the group, so they said you can do it. Thanks, guys. Really interesting to hear everybody's feedback and how everybody's taken a slightly different take on the question. We seem to spend a lot of time talking about the grey areas, what to do when there are grey areas, and also when you might be looking at failing a student. So the points that we raised that I don't think have been covered yet, aroha mai if they have already, we talked about using the key teaching tasks in the practicum indicators, keeping them at the forefront and discussed often with students and with ATs to try and get everyone on the same page and to see what they look like in practice. We talked about, as students get to near the end of their study, actually asking them to be prepared to lead the triadic with their evidence, so they become the facilitator and the most important person in that conversation. The AT voice is kind of secondary to that, and then I see my voice as being less important in that process as students are getting to the end. Regular check-ins with the ATs as well as with each student as the practicum progresses. So I ring my students every week when they're on practicum, and I always talk with the AT as well, and that way there's no surprises. Some of the things that Karen was talking about in her presentation, that means you've got the relationships, you've got the clarity building, so by the time you get to the assessment visit, there's no surprises and you're pretty much on the same page. As part of that, the importance of carrying people with you, so sharing notes between all parties about any conversations had, so that if I've had a conversation with a student, I usually say to them at the end, if I'm working in that grey intuitive space, I usually say to them, look, I'm going to send you an email with what I think we talked about. Can you please check it and confirm? And I'd like to send it to your AT as well. And that keeps everything very transparent and everyone on the same page. And if you're really, really stuck and you think that this is heading to a grey place, you're not sure, you think there might be values differences, that bias creeping in, then considering having someone else come with you to do that as part of that final triadic and to do that final observation. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, thank you, Sandy. And room 8, Ian, Jackie, Sarah.
Kia ora koutou, Ian McGilchrist here at University of Otago. I think I'd like to talk about everything that people have said, and if I can be really concise, I think the two key themes, without repeating myself from what other people have said, would be relationships would be one of them. It's a big ask for our young people, and I teach in the secondary field, so all of my students are graduates already. My youngest student is 21, but if you're a first-year BTeach student, it's hard to expect them to initiate, maintain, and repair relationship issues in schools, you know, without the sort of the support of us coaching them, and that's a real tough challenge, I think. I think of some of the secondary students I have at the other end of the country now, and are trying to build relationships with maybe 80 to 100 students and 2 or 3 mentor teachers and 1 liaison teacher, and you know, it's very demanding for them. And I think the experience of COVID has probably not enhanced anyone's capability in relationship management. So that's at one point. The second one is communication, of course. Hard to see, you know, consistent communication that lets us see students developing and growing over a placement. And so we talked about a range of ways that can be that can be done, you know, such as with reflections, phone calls, reflection diaries. We use Google Docs. It just makes things easier. But that's probably all I could say that isn't repeating what other people have said.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. And the last room are Karen, Linda, and Mary.
Kia ora koutou. Yeah, we had a lot of kōrero around having reliable relationships. So in order for a system to be reliable, our relationships need to be reliable as well. So we talked about things like there needs to be a big understanding that often our assessment is high stakes assessment, especially thinking of that year 3 scenario. And that was talked about in terms of it shouldn't be a surprise that a student is struggling on that final year, because it should have already come up in the previous year. So we talked about, through the triad relationship, really having to understand that these are high stakes assessments. We also talked about the importance for seeing our student teachers as our colleagues, and seeing this as a continuum, and seeing and how do we have that with our ATs, that they see the student teachers already as colleagues entering into a profession. But we also talked about the challenge of that, where we don't want it to be just that everyone's best friends and we're not actually addressing the criteria and that kind of thing. So we did understand that also that was a continuum. And yeah, and professional mentoring, I think Ian just touched on that as well, just that really importance of having professional mentoring for our visiting tutors, for our students. To have courageous conversations requires a lot of mahi. So how do we do that, and how do we support that? Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thanks, Mary. And thank you all. That was great feedback. And I think, Ian, as you pointed out, there are definitely some themes coming through, and relationships, of course, is the biggest one. And but connected to that is the whole area of communication. So it was a really rich dialogue, and I'm really looking forward to sifting through all those notes as well. One thing we have been asked is to do a part B to this, because we realise, it's a short, a short time frame today, but there's possibly more deeper drilling that you would like to do. And as Jay mentioned as well, with more of a collaborative approach, perhaps you'd like to work together to come up with some shared understandings to get in sort of a more of a national viewpoint. So just as an indication, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the little raise hand icon. If you could just raise your hand if you'd like a part B, we'd be happy to facilitate that. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, that looks like a really good indication that that would be something that we would be able to do. So I think in the next part B session, we could facilitate maybe more of you leading the session, and this could be a nice introduction, and perhaps the next time we can drill a little bit deeper into some of the issues. So if you have some ideas about the areas that you'd like to drill down into, pop them in the chat now, because we can sift through those in our planning towards the next session. Okay, I'm just really mindful that we've really gone through the time. Really quickly, so we've got some upcoming ITE Symposia. If you'd like to take a photo of the screen so you can pop them in your diaries now. May the 4th, we have a curriculum refresh with the MOE. Early June, we've got some PGC for ITE teachers and ITE staff. We haven't got the dates firmed up for those yet, but they will be probably more webinar type thing rather than a symposium. In June 27th, 28th, we've got the TFANS Hui, which you will see us at. We're all going to be there, so we're hoping that you'll be able to join us, and that of course is open to everybody, not only TFANS members. August 16th, we're looking at the code, getting some of our professional people here from the PR team to come and help us host that. September 20th, another inclusive education, which was going to be slightly longer this time, for a bit of an in-depth look into that. October 18th, curriculum specialist support, and November 29th are just a nice roundup of the year, because that would be almost the end of the year, which is incredible. It was going so fast. I'd like to thank again and acknowledge the work and the courage of Karen and Amanda to come and share. It's always really tricky to share to your peers. And so we thank you so much, because without your input, it certainly wouldn't have been as rich as it has been.
Ngā mihi, Kelly. Kua ea ki runga, kua ea ki raro. E rongo whakairihia kia runga kia tina. Tina. Haumi e, kui e,
Ai,
tau.
ki e.